So that's kind of where I want to start, and not so much in terms of vampires, but in terms of ships and the sea. Why don't we get more movies set on ships and the high seas? Is it because it's hard? Is it because of an expense thing? Because I find whether it's like a submarine movie or a pirate movie or something set on an old wooden ship like yours, I generally find that I always love them.
So do I. I mean, but they're always very hard to make, and they tend to be, more expensive than you'd like to make, and they tend to be, they do tend to be very hard to make.
What about that? What about the challenge? Crafting a ship film did you find to be the most challenging?
I mean, it's the shooting environment that is so hard, because you are on an unstable environment, first of all, and it's isolated because you have to use we had to have like what do you call it, platforms out to the ship. That takes a lot of time. Even if you have to go to the bathroom, you have to get off the ship and over there, and if an actor does that in the middle of a scene you're shooting, suddenly you're waiting for 10 minutes for a small thing. And also just the environment around you. There might be ocean and sky, but in our case we were shooting in a tank to be able to control the shooting environment more and make it safer and make it more practical. But still, it's so impractical, because on one hand you have a view out to the ocean from the tank, so that helps. You do have some sky, but around you you're still in a harbor, so you're literally surrounded by just stuff. You're like containers and crew and equipment and cars and all kinds of stuff. So you have to set up huge blue screens, and then they don't really cover what you need, and suddenly you're in rotoscope hell, and it's just a grueling shooting environment. Also, like in our case, we were shooting in the middle of the night for like 6 weeks on deck of that ship, and in the middle of the summer when we were shooting, you only get, like in Malta, you only get 9-10 hours of daylight. No, sorry, of night. And then you're always just fighting that with a situation where you're shooting, the ratio is much smaller than on a regular set. You also have the issues of the short, the short nights, the short shooting nights. So it was very tricky. It was a very tricky movie to make, but I think I love the fact that we were able to do it physically on a ship. We constructed the ship ourselves.
And it pays off. This film, especially in the age of like the volume tech, this film has a real texture to it that it needs, frankly, not just to put you out on sea, but to have you to immersed in the terror of it. Like you feel the boat creaking and cranking and the water splashing up. And that brings me to something else that I'm curious about in terms of the technical difficulty of the shoot. I thought this film was lit incredibly, which I know is hard, A, because it's at night, B, because like you said, you're on a moving surface, and C, it's raining a lot. So talk to me about how you guys honed in on your technique to light and shoot this film.
No, I mean, it was a lot of planning, because all the interiors, for to start with that, were built on a stage in Babelsberg in Berlin. So we built the whole ship as one big piece with a couple of offshoots for a couple of specific rooms where we needed something else. And so the whole thing is one big interior of the ship. And then we set up basically lights in through little portholes and cracks and windows everywhere, and they all had to be synchronized, and they all had to be switchable from daylight to night light, and different directions. And also, in addition, they were also on like some kind of a wobbling system, I don't know what to call it, like so they could go up and down to to give you the feeling with the light inside of the
like
movement.
The bobbing.
Yeah, the bobbing. Yes, exactly. That's the word. So that's that was all a very, very an amazing setup that our lighting crew did. And also in Malta, when we were shooting on the exterior of the deck, we had these two enormous light banks. I hope there are some pictures of all that set somewhere that you can find and put in your presentation. But it's they were just huge, but sometimes they were hanging off large cranes, and sometimes there would be too much wind on coming on the set, and then we had to take everything down. And then we're like, well, okay, we got to still keep shooting. We can't just stop shooting in the middle of the night now. So we had an extra reserve lights that then came up on smaller rigs, on lower stands. And that obviously, presents a problem visually, because the moon is up there, not down here. So we also had, then we had other issues with how do we need to change the mechanics of the scene to fit that lighting scenario. And the DOP would be working with reflectors and with anything he could to change the feeling of the light. But he's Tom Stern, who I shot the movie with, is a master of light and lighting fast, and he knows how to create beautiful shapes with minimal lighting. It was astounding to watch how he walked around the set and just lit it in minutes sometimes.
Yeah, it looks great. I less on the camera side and more on the script side. Horror to me is basically a alchemy of tension, right? It's how you ratchet up tension at a certain pace to boil at the right time. And I'm curious, like, how that works in this genre. How do you decide which character dies first and how that death comes about? Is it already on the page once it gets to you? Is that something that you're involved in?
First of all, I don't really walk around with ideas of how to brutally kill people, but
I mean, well,
No, I know what you mean. But no, I mean, first of all, it comes from the script. But it's a fluid process. The moment you get the script, there are things that are worked brilliantly, beautifully, and then you have an idea of something else. So what if we do this, and what if we do that? How can we amp this up? How can we change the focus of this scene? So then you work with the writer to reshape some of the moments, some of the scenes. But also in this particular case, we obviously had the captain's log from the book, the actual chapter the movie is based on. And it's kind of there is a story that's told there. And the first one to go, I believe, also in the book, is the guy named Petrovsky. And he's also in our movie. That becomes the natural choice.
Okay, gotcha. And then this is something I specifically ask horror directors because I find this to be more difficult in their genre. Cinema is obviously a visual and auditory art form, but it begins on the page. And that's particularly interesting as it relates to horror, given how much of it is conjured through sight and sound. So I'm curious, when you're reading a script, how do you know if something's scary? Do you just have an instinct for, you know what I mean? Like, how are you able to see it in your mind's eye? How are you able to get from page to film and know before you get there that this is going to work?
By now, I've loved horror movies from I was a kid. So I've watched so much horror, and I've read so much horror, and I've obviously made a few horror movies by now. So it's become kind of my thing in life to be able to figure this out. So I have to trust my instincts. And when I'm reading something, I have to sit and imagine, how does this scene play? what if we play this whole scene in a wide shot from far away? Is that the best way? Or is it best to be in tight and breathing and not see what's around the character? These kind of decisions are just creative decisions that you can go either way. One director will choose that and another director will choose that. They might both work. If the scene is written with tension in its inception anyway, where you have a great setup, great fear, characters who really are scared of what's going on, you know, all these elements that actually, but I do think that when it comes, going away from the filmmaking side of it, the actual technical filmmaking side of it, it does come down to the reality of the characters. If the characters believe in what they're up against, if you believe in the characters and what they are, the decisions they are making, then essentially, I think you're already on a great path to figuring it out.
Well, let me say, I feel like a shortcut to helping the viewers of this film believe in the challenge that the main characters face is, and I love this, and you don't see this a lot in vampire films, they don't know how to deal with it. In most vampire films, wooden stake, silver bullet, all that is common knowledge. Them like discovering, oh my God, the sunlight for the first time, I think makes it so much more of a new experience in such a well-worn genre.
I totally, I love that you noted that, because that's something I've also felt about this movie, is that we do, even though we all know the basic mythology of Dracula, and that mythology is essentially there anyway, because this is Dracula, we are still reliving those tropes as if they were new, because these characters have no idea. As you say, there is no Van Helsing telling us how all this works. There is nobody. They're all lost. They're all alone, and they're fighting this devil. They have no way to figure, you know, they have no idea what it is.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part of the film. Now, our government just did us the favor of confirming to us that aliens are real. That's something I kind of always believed in the first place. But have you allowed yourself to consider the possibility, and this is a legit, Andre, this is a serious question. Have you allowed yourself to consider the possibility? Because, right, if you think about that, aliens have been myths for a long time. So what differentiates them from vampires and zombies? Have you allowed yourself to consider that things like this might be real too?
Sorry, like vampires, like Dracula-ish?
Yeah.
Oh God, I'm such a realist. I believe, you know, I'm such a scientifically minded realist. Therefore, I love this conflict that you'll see if you look into my movies. You'll see that most of them, all of them, I really deal with the conflict between science and the supernatural. So does this movie, because I am fascinated by the things I don't understand, the things that I cannot grasp. You know, from religion to religious aspects of that to just silly superstition. And I think that is you know, it's a fascinating subject, but I have to admit I'm such a realist, but I do believe in aliens in a way out there. I don't know if I believe they've been here.
Right. Okay. Because you know, like I said, this is something I've always generally believed in, but just in the added context of like closing my eyes and be like, okay, somebody confirmed that they're real, and then applying that to other myths I have experienced throughout my life, it adds a whole new context of, you know, the vampire one sounds a lot more realistic than the beings from outer space one, at least.
Yeah, no, and there are vampires, there are animals, there are bats, there are vampire creatures. You know, in nature, vampirism isn't unknown. So, yeah, one day we'll find a whole coven of vampires somewhere.
I actually had the chance to interview the last actor to play Dracula on screen before this film, and that is Nick Cage. And I asked him about the process of adding his own layers and details to a character that's so iconic that virtually everyone knows who he is and understands what he should be. So I want to ask you that same thing. How did you add your own layers and tics and quirks to such an iconic vision?
I mean, I always thought of him from I read the script. I leaned into the idea that he's an old man. He's over 400 years old. And I wanted you to feel that texture on somebody who had lived and killed and maimed and tortured, and God knows what this horrible creature has done to steal people's blood for centuries. And I found that to be a fascinating way in that I hadn't seen before, because, or not much anyway, because they're usually suave, cool, sexy creatures, from in Interview with the Vampire to, Gary Oldman to whoever. So many people, so many wonderful actors who have portrayed vampires, and including Nicolas Cage, obviously. And I just leaned into that fact. And then Javier Botet was just a perfect actor to portray that kind of menace in a way. That yeah.
So is the idea of him being like a creature who gets stronger and becomes younger as he consumes blood, and is more of that, like, is that something that was from this chapter as well, or were these your own sort of spins on how you wanted this character to look?
I mean, this chapter in the book is very barren. It's very simple because it's all told through observations by the captain and his crew. So it's about, so the first mate came and told me today that he had seen somebody walk around on a ship.
Yeah, I had read, and it's like day 2, the guy's gone.
Yeah. So it's very cold and very simple and only at the very end of the chapter does the captain start losing his mind and start to really go into absolute terror. So so it was kind of very simple. It doesn't really say much about Dracula at all. It just says something about a shape that is on the ship and his fear of the devil. So it's kind of indicated, and we just, a screenplay, in this case, had to fill out all the stuff that's missing, as opposed to a big novel. If you're doing a big novel of 400 pages, you usually have to condense and you have to simplify and take out. We actually had to add stuff. So the script that Bragi Schutt wrote, is about imagining what happens between the captain's log entries.
Yeah, and I don't know if what I read online was the exact text that Bram Stoker had wrote it, but even in its sparseness and bareness, it's still utterly chilling.
Yeah, it is. It's a really extremely well-written novel in so many ways. It's iconic. Yeah.
So I'm almost afraid to ask this because I don't want to give them any ideas, but given how franchise crazed Hollywood has become, combined with how consistently profitable the horror genre is, why do you think there hasn't been another crack at a monster hunter film, i.e., as you brought up, Van Helsing? I feel like that's kind of just right there waiting for people.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, there are so many fun stories to tell around that. And of course, there have been a couple of cool action horror movies like Van Helsing and The Last Witch Hunter, I think, was one. And there were movies that is in this kind of ilk of that you're talking about. But yeah, it's definitely a subgenre that can be explored much more because it is fun.
And I'm fascinated when you bring up subgenres. For the first time last night, I watched Jane Doe as well, which, again, both horror, but starkly different than this type of film. Did you see your set? Why did you take this on? Was it just because you liked the script? Did you want to escalate the challenges that you bring on yourself as a filmmaker? I'm curious of what leads to your choices in bouncing from subgenre to subgenre.
No, I mean, I love horror in all its, all its glory, from big horror movies to small, very intimate horror movies. They can all be fantastic stories and scary. And it's the weird thing, a tiny little horror movie of a couple of $1 million can make, can go worldwide, become a big success because people engage in that scary scenario in any level. And I love challenges. Every movie I make has to be something different, something I haven't done before, or else it's, I feel like I'm just threading, and I don't want to try to avoid threading in other people's shoes as well, because there are so many great movies out there and I love so many of them. And I just want to try to make things I believe is a little bit unique. You can never make something completely unique. It will always resemble something. And people will see something in your movie that you didn't even realize as you were making it. And that's also some of the joy of seeing the reception of a movie, is to see how people react differently to it.
So have you seen the new film Talk to Me?
I am dying to see it, and it's on my agenda for the next week.
Okay, all right, I've got to be concerned in how I word this then. Your film Jane Doe ends with the lead character briefly believing he had escaped this hell, only to realize that he had not. I find this to be a very common horror trope, and no matter how many times I see it, it's effective as hell. Tell me why.
God, I wish I knew everything about horror. I mean, it's
so off-putting and bone-chilling.
Yeah, no, at the same, I think you crave, as an audience in a horror movie, you crave a certain knowledge of what's going to happen, but not exactly what's going to happen. I think the idea that you can kind of feel that I know it's going to come a last blast at me here, but I think you just want it at the same time as you know it, is it can kind of be intellectually annoying to realize that you are in a way a moment ahead of the film, but at the same time you're just craving it because it's the fun of watching a horror movie.
I loved the way that you framed Hirsch's eyes to have that sheen of gray on them as he's banging up against the basement door, and I feel like for a moment, like his eyes haven't clouded over, but the way that the lighting looks, it looks like his eyes are gray. And as soon as that hit, I was like, "Oh, this guy's so screwed."
Yeah, and I love that moment when he just starts hearing that song and everything. That was great in the script. That is a brilliant script.
Yeah, for sure. Tight, so tight. Talk to me about Bryan Cox, who's become one of the esteemed actors in the world since you made this film with him. Got any stories that pop in your head when I bring up his name? Because he strikes me as a very no bullshit guy. So I'm trying to picture like telling him, "All right, Bryan, in this scene, you're running away from a ghost."
No, I mean, he was a fantastic sport about everything we needed him to do. He was in on every single thing and grabbed it by the throat and did what he and really was there for every single moment. He's such a pro. And I remember there was one day he was really sick, actually, and he still came, and he could have called in sick and we would have lost a production day, but he came as a trooper and worked through the whole day with whatever condition he was in, and did one of the best scenes in the movie, and you can't tell. So it was I don't know, he was such a and he came there, he knew everything, he knew his lines, he understood his character. It was so easy to work with him. He understood the blocking, and I remember I was asking him to we had some specific blocking, and I asked him to move around a table and over and just outside of frame. And he knew when he was out of frame, he just knew exactly where the frame was. So the moment he stepped outside the frame, he started dancing. He started tap dancing just for the crew. So they all started laughing. I mean, it was while the camera was now actually supposed to be on Emil. And it was just like hilarious how well he instinctively knew the lenses.
And when your star brings that combo of professionalism and levity to a set, I could only imagine how much easier that makes your job.
Yeah, I mean, the two of them, both Emil and Bryan, were amazing to work with. They were really good, and also, obviously, my mind goes blank now. Who is playing the corpse?
I just looked it up last night too.
Yeah. Anyway, suddenly my mind just went blank. But she was also an amazing trooper. She was lying there for.
I was curious about that. That doesn't seem easy.
No, it wasn't. And also being still. Obviously, we fixed stuff in post to take out. It's amazing what you see in skin movements and little muscle movements that you cannot predict when you're that close.
Her name is Olwen Kelly.
Olwen. Oh my God, I'm embarrassed. Of course, Olwen. Thank you. So that's so she was the trio of them through that shoot were absolutely amazing to work with, and it wouldn't be possible without her as well, just doing all that work.
So I've got one more here before I wrap it up, and I'm curious. This is a Universal film. They are perhaps the iconic horror studio. this is a Dracula film, but I'm amazed that that the marketing team let this film be put out without the word Dracula in it. I, as a film fan, love that, but I'm shocked that they let that one fly. So that got me thinking, what do you think about legacy sequels to iconic horror films? You've got the Halloweens and the Exorcists of the world. While this isn't so much a legacy sequel, it is, of course, another Dracula story. You are likely a horror purist, so I'm curious what you think about this trend.
I mean, of course I have a genuine love for all these classic movies that are being remade, because they are remade because they're amazing movies, or done sequels to because they're amazing movies, even 10, 15, 20 years later. And so that's a hard one. Of course, those are amazing movies, but it's also possible to reimagine things for a modern audience. So it can be a great idea. I'm dying to see the new Exorcist movie, for example. There are some great remakes and some great follow-up movies years after the original was made. So it's quite possible to do it, and I don't really see a reason not to. Question is, do I want to do it? I don't know, but definitely I enjoy the fact that we can update these movies for a modern audience.
Well, and I catch you at not a good time, because this is of course sad, but the great William Friedkin just passed, and and you would hear him talk about the Exorcist sequels with such disdain. But from my point of view, I'm 30, right? And I always found that I never got a chance to enjoy Star Wars the way my father did, because by the time I understood it, it looked old. So I feel like if you're genuinely able to reinvent things with a purpose, so a whole new generation of fans can learn to love it, I think that that's worthwhile.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you mean. I mean, basically, the big reveal of between Luke and Darth Vader is like a meme now. My kid, 11, he discovers that through a meme, you know. It's like, oh God, that's a big reveal, you know.
Yeah, exactly. All right, André, thank you so much for your time today. I had a blast with this film, and I can't wait to see what you do next. In fact, just real quick, do you have something lined up next, or?
I mean, not that specific. I mean, we're all waiting for the strikes to, you know, to hopefully go over soon. Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, thank you so much for your time, and congrats again on the film.